In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to substitute to solve equations. The key word here is substituting, which means to replace a variable with a number. In our first example, we have a triangle. We know that its base is 14 centimeters, and we also know its area. So I'm just going to write that down so you remember that A stands for area, and this 14 is the length of the base. With this information, we want to figure out the height of the triangle, and I'm going to represent this with the variable of h. So h stands for height. There's a formula that includes area, base, and height of a triangle. And that formula is A equals 1 over 2 times base times height. And I'm going to write that down over here. Area is equal to 1 over 2 times base times height. We know what the area is equal to, and we know what the base is equal to. However, we do not know what the height is equal to, and we want to solve for that variable of h. The first thing you want to do is substitute in your known values. I'm going to substitute in area, and I'm going to substitute in base. So I'm going to write that down. Substitute A equals 70 and substitute B equals 14. I'm going to move this up so I have more space to work with. You'll notice when I substitute in a value, I'm going to use brackets. I'm going to replace the variable of A with 70 in brackets, and I'm going to replace the variable of B with 14 in brackets. Everything else stays the same. In our next step, we want to simplify some of the numbers we have here. Let's take a look at the right side. I have 1 over 2 multiplied by 14. Let's go ahead and write that on the side. I have 1 over 2 multiplied by 14. Remember, when you have a number in front of a pair of brackets, the operation is multiplication. So I can rewrite this as 1 over 2 multiplied by 14. 14 is a whole number, but if I were to change it into a fraction, it would be 14 over 1. When you're multiplying fractions, all you have to do is multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. So that would give me 1 times 14 is 14, and the denominators, 2 times 1 is 2. Remember, fractions is the same thing as division. 14 divided by 2 is 7. So I can go ahead and simplify that into 7. That h stays exactly the same. If you recall, we ultimately want to figure out what h is equal to. We want to isolate h. However, h is stuck with the 7. When you have a number in front of a variable, there is a multiplication between them. Okay, so the coefficient is 7. Therefore, the opposite of multiply by 7 is divide by 7. So I'm going to divide both sides by 7. I'm going to write 70 over 7 and 7h over 7. Remember, writing it as a fraction is the same thing as division. Over on the left side, this should be pretty easy. Positive 70 divided by positive 7 is positive 10. Over on the right side, we're going to take a look at positive 7 divided by positive 7, which becomes positive 1, and the h stays exactly the same. However, as I've spoken many times before, anything multiplied by positive 1 stays exactly the same. Therefore, this will just be h instead of 1h. So 10 is equal to h, and that is the final answer. And let's just zoom out to show you all the work that was required for this question. And I almost forgot, we need a concluding sentence, since this is kind of like a word problem. And I'm going to say, the height of the triangle is 10. However, you do need to indicate the units. If you go back to the original question, the units are centimeters. So the height is going to be in centimeters. In our next example, we have a rectangular garden, and we know the width of the garden is 11 meters. We also know that the perimeter is equal to 63 meters. However, we do not know what the length of this garden is, and we would like to figure that out. I'm going to go ahead and label some of these variables so that you know what they stand for. L stands for length. I like to use a handwritten L because it's a little bit less confusing than a regular printed L, which looks like a 1. The W is width, and P stands for perimeter. This should all be review. There's one formula that contains all of these variables, P, W, and L, and that is the perimeter formula for a rectangle. If you don't remember, the perimeter formula is P is equal to 2 multiplied by L plus 2 multiplied by W. We know what P is equal to, and we know what W is equal to. So let's go ahead and substitute in these values. I'm going to write sub P equals 63 and sub W equals 11. When I substitute in these values, I'm going to use brackets. So I'm going to put 63 in brackets over here. Everything else stays the same. And I'm going to put 11 over here where the W used to be. Let's go ahead and scroll up to make more space for ourselves. In our next step, we're going to look to the right of the equation and we're going to simplify this portion, okay? When you have a number in front of a pair of brackets, remember that there's multiplication hidden there, okay? We want to multiply positive 2 by 11. It's important that you look at the sign, okay? So positive 2 times 11, that's pretty easy. 2 times 11 is 22. If you don't believe me, you can go ahead and use a calculator. So I'm going to change that into 22. If you recall one of our previous lessons, when you're solving for a variable, you kind of have to do the opposite of bed mass. So I'm going to write out bed mass, and we are going to do the opposite. Okay, so I'm going to show you over here, we have the variable that we're looking for, which is L. However, it is stuck with this plus 22, and it is also stuck with this multiplied by 2. A lot of you might be confused as to deal with this plus 22 first or this multiplied by 2. According to the reverse of bed mass, we're going to deal with addition and subtraction first, and then multiplication and division. So that means we're going to deal with this plus 22 first. Add 22. What is the opposite of that? That is subtract 22. So we are going to subtract 22 from both sides of the equation. On the left side of the equation, I'm going to go ahead and remove the brackets around 63 because that doesn't really affect it. I'm going to subtract 22. And over on the right side, I am going to subtract 22 as well, because what you do to one side, you also have to do to the other side. I'm going to move this up so that we have a little bit more space to finish this question. Let's go ahead and simplify what we have on the left. 63 minus 22. Again, if you can't do that in your head, go ahead and use a calculator. That's going to be equal to 41. The 2L stays exactly the same. Over here on the right, we have positive 22, subtract 22. which is going to be equal to 0, and we're not going to write in the 0. We're almost done, except we have 2, which is stuck to the variable which we are looking for. If you recall, when you have a number in front of a variable, the operation is multiplication. So you have to ask yourself, what is the opposite of multiply by 2? The opposite of multiply by 2 is divide by 2. So I'm going to divide both sides by 2. I'm going to use fractions to do that, so 41 over 2 and 2L over 2. If you put 41 over 2 into your calculator, you're going to get 20.5. I'm going to show you the work on the side over here. 41 over 2 is the same thing as 41 divided by 2, which is equal to 20.5. Remember, we have positive 2 here divided by positive 2, which is going to be equal to positive 1. That variable L stays exactly the same. However, if you recall, anything multiplied by positive 1 stays the same. Therefore, we don't need to write in that positive 1, and we can just write L. So our length actually is 20.5. I'm going to summarize this with a concluding statement. The length is 20.5 meters. How did I know it was meters? If you look back at the question, that was in meters and that was in meters. In our last example, we were given the information that Frances earned $426 this week. She's paid $11.75 per hour, and she also gets a $50 weekly bonus. The question also provides a formula for her pay, and that formula is P is equal to 11.75 times H plus 50. The P stands for her total pay. The 11.75 is her hourly rate. The H is the hours that she actually works. And the $50 is her weekly bonus. That's where everything is coming from. At the end of this question, we want to figure out how many hours she actually worked. The variable that we're given is the pay. We're told that she earns $426 this week. Therefore, we're going to substitute in that number. I'm going to write sub P equals 426. I'm going to move this up to make more space for myself. When I substitute in that number, I'm going to put it in brackets. So 426 is equal to 11.75 times H plus 50. Our goal is to isolate H. However, H is stuck with this plus 50 and is stuck with this multiplied by 11.75. Which one are we going to deal with first? Well, you're going to use the reverse of bedmass. And the reverse of bedmass tells us that we should deal with addition and subtraction before multiplication and division. Therefore, we're going to deal with this plus 50 before we deal with this 11.75. Let's look at this plus 50. To get rid of this plus 50, we have to do the opposite operation, which is subtract 50. Therefore, we're going to subtract 50 from both sides of the equation. Over on the left side of the equation, I'm going to drop the brackets since they aren't really required. Everything else is going to stay the same. And I'm going to subtract 50 from the right side as well, because what you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. I'm going to go ahead and move that to the top. Over on the left of the side of the equation, I'm going to simplify 426 subtract 50. If you can't do that in your head, go ahead and use a calculator. That is equal to 376. Over on the right side of the equation, I'm going to simplify positive 50 subtract 50. You should know that that cancels out, becomes 0, and you don't have to write it in. So all we're left with is 11.75 times h. If you recall, the h is stuck with 11.75. The operation that is happening is multiplication. Remember, when you have a number in front of a variable with no sign, the sign that's actually hidden is multiplication. So the opposite of multiply by 11.75 is divide by 11.75. So I'm going to write that down. Divide by 11.75. How am I going to show that? Well, I'm going to write 376 divided by 11.75. And on the right side, I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to put that over 11.75. If you take 376 and divide it by 11.75, your answer is going to be 32. Over on the right side of the equation, 11.75 divided by 11.75 is just positive 1. The h stays the same. And as you recall, anything multiplied by positive 1 stays exactly the same. So that is just h, because positive 1 multiplied by h is h. I'm going to zoom out and show you all the work that was done for this question. I'm going to put a square around my final answer, and I'm also going to write a concluding statement. I'm going to write Francis worked 32 what? 32 hours. If you recall, that was what we were solving for, the number of hours worked. Francis worked 32 hours this week.